The epidemic of fentanyl is hitting close to home here in the DMV so far. In 2023, 4 juveniles have overdosed in Arlington and in Montgomery County. There's been a 120% increase in deaths among kids, all due to fentanyl overdoses in the last year alone. Jimmy Alexander is here now. Jimmy, I know that this is something that has touched your family.
Yeah, Joseph, 2 years ago, we lost my brother Mark to an overdose, and it's when something like that hits your family, it's chaos. You try to make sense of it, and sadly, you can't. But you think to yourselves, what can we do to help anybody? Well, that happened to one family in Reston, and they sadly lost a beloved member of their family due to an overdose, and their story could save the life of someone you love.
I love to talk about my brother because he was a really amazing character. He was brilliant. He was unbelievably funny. I always called him Jim Carrey's long-lost son because that's just who he reminded me of. When he was entering puberty age, he started to exhibit some symptoms of depression and anxiety. And he was actually 15 years old when he started using intravenous heroin. He was in and out of treatment for about 6 years. In February of 2013, I came home from work and I found him unresponsive, and I did not have Narcan, so I was not able to save him.
For a family who is living their worst nightmare, you and your family decided to give back and do something in your brother's honor.
We launched the Chris Atwood Foundation just a few weeks after his death, and in the years since, it has grown into a recovery and harm reduction community organization that is almost entirely staffed by people with lived experience with substance use disorder who help people from a place of understanding. We get it because we've been there, and we provide services like overdose reversal training and free access to naloxone, all of the things we wish that my brother had.
Jenny, what about kids? How do you sit down and talk to them frankly about this?
I would say, number one, start the conversation early. I mentioned my brother was 15 when he started using IV heroin, and he was younger than that when he started experimenting with other drugs. It's really hard to look at your 11-year-old baby and think that they could be doing that, but I know many people who started when they were 11, so have the conversation early. Trauma is probably the biggest pathway that leads to substance use disorder, but know that trauma is subjective, and trauma isn't necessarily, being part of a fatal car wreck. It's your parents got divorced. It's you had a really embarrassing incident with your friends at school. These kinds of things can be very deeply traumatic depending on the kid. Address any underlying mental health condition early. It's better to overtreat it than undertreat it, because people who have mental illnesses are at a much higher rate of having substance use disorder co-occurring as well. So if your child is experiencing any symptoms of anxiety or depression, social issues with school, definitely get help before you think you really need it.
So Jimmy, normally you come in here with a fun, happy story, and I know, like we've talked about at the very beginning of the story, this has touched you so incredibly close, you and your family. Yeah. I wonder, being the fun, energetic person that you are, we're seeing so many teenagers overdose. You don't have any kids, but how would you go about having a conversation that actually touches them and gets them to realize how dangerous this stuff is?
I can't imagine, and again, as you said, I'm not a parent, but the first thought that we and our family had when my brother Mark died of an overdose was, thank God that my mom was gone, that she didn't have to witness this and live through this. And that's why it's so important to have your conversation with your kid. And notice how young she said. Her brother started at 11 years old, Jenny said. And one of the comments that she made that's so important when you're talking to your kids about things like this is, don't do it in a preachy way, don't do it in a judgmental way, and rant and rave. Have a conversation and ask your kids questions. Have they heard of fentanyl? Do they know anybody who may be taking drugs? And a very important question, why do you think somebody is taking drugs? These are all important questions that you desperately need to have with your kids as we're finding out each and every day here in the DMV.